Hey, my friends, welcome back to Frogboy X1 Gaming. I'm Andrew, and today I want to talk about something that is kind of getting a little bit noticeable, if you know what I mean. So, thank you guys for coming back. Thank you guys for watching. I want to jump right into this. I want to make you guys, I want you guys to, well, I want to talk about this because I've kind of felt like this is a little bit weird now. Is 1080p unacceptable for Xbox Series X and PS5? And I know that you guys all feel like 30 frames per second is unacceptable. For the most part, so do I. I do. Like I much prefer playing games at 60 frames per second than I do at 30 frames per second. 30 frames per second is doable. I just did it with Final Fantasy 16. I'll be doing it with Starfield and more in the coming. But is 1080p unacceptable for you? And you're probably thinking like where's this? Well, sub 1080p. We're seeing games as low as 720p on PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. I don't know if we've seen any 720p at Xbox Series X. I think PlayStation still holds that crown, but and this is not a console war thing. I promise you. This is both of these consoles, man. Like, we are starting to see sub 1080p when we want 60 frames per second. Like, I don't know what's going on, man. The first couple of years during this generation, we were getting, our over 1440p at 60 frames per second in big open world games like Assassin's Creed Valhalla. 1440p, 60 frames per second. Actually, that game went even higher. I was like, wow, getting backward compatible games. We're getting Assassin's Creed Origins 4K 60. We're getting Assassin's Creed Odyssey 4K 60. Other games like Far Cry 5, Far Cry 6 even, like all of these games, and they looked incredible. They looked better than what we were getting last generation. Am I right? And now all of a sudden we're getting games that let's be completely honest, look marginally better than what we were already getting through cross-gen as next-gen games, and they're still not even able to hit 1440p at 60 frames per second, let alone 1080p at 60 frames per second. Now, I know what you're going to say, but the PlayStation games have been blah, blah, blah. Every single one of those have been cross-generation games, and they look like cross-generation games. They still look like cross-generation games, with Horizon Forbidden West probably being the best looking one out of those. You can still see when you walk by the ground and look down at the ground, you can still see the old little texture maps on the grass and the ground and the dirt and stuff. Whereas if you look at something like Forspoken, that's fully rendered ground and it looks better. Now, I want to take a minute and I want to explain some of the stuff that I've seen going through as I've been playing some of these next-gen only games that everybody's been passing up because they're 720p. I've been playing these games, guys, and I've been noticing the upgrades that most people are like, oh, man, that doesn't... I've been noticing this stuff. Better ground textures, higher quality terrain, better looking rock faces, geometry, like just the detail is there. Like, we are getting the detail upgrades. We are getting the new geometry systems. We are getting new meshes for different types of textures, and they are looking better. They're higher resolution textures, but we're getting dropped back down to sub 1080p. So is it making a big enough difference with all of these new visuals? Are they making a big enough difference to show you the quality of the game, or are they getting drowned out when it comes to the lower resolution? And I say yes, it is. So, and here's the perfect point that I want to make. I've played games like Final Fantasy 16 on my 4K screen and on my 1440p monitor. I played Forspoken that way as well. I played Jedi Survivor that way. I've played all of these newer games that are coming out that are next-gen only. I've played them on my monitor and on my TV. When I play them on my monitor, they look literally incredible. Literally incredible. Like, people are, you drops to 720p. It's not that big of a difference on a 1440p monitor. But when you switch over and you look at it on 4K, yeah, it does look low. I feel like the lower resolution on a 4K screen is stripping out all of the new benefits that you would get had you had the accurate resolution screen for your games. Now, I'm not saying this like, dude, I'm seriously not on a crusade against 4K. Like, I'm not. I like 4K. I think it's great. I think it's awesome. But at the same time, I also feel that this console generation is going to be the most divisive console generation that we've ever had before. And that's easy to see. Seeing what I see now and seeing it from 1440p to 4K, to being able to see stuff on the ROG Ally, and being able to look at these things on a PC with max settings and stuff like that. Like, there's a bigger picture that's just barely coming together. And I feel like after I'm done explaining this, or at least I hope I can articulate this to a point where you'll be able to understand and you'll be able to make a better decision for these consoles that will allow you to continue to play and enjoy next gen games. Now, I want to use Final Fantasy 16 because that's the freshest on my mind. That's the first one I just beat. Well, actually, I just had Jedi Survivor. It got a new update. I was looking at that on Series S on my 1440p monitor. Now, this is what I want to stress, man. When I played Jedi Survivor on the 4K screen, I felt like, I was like, okay, I guess this is acceptable. I mean, it looks all right. It's not like perfect by any means, but the 60 frames per second, the VRR support makes it a little bit stabler. It doesn't look too bad, but it does look fuzzy, blurry in certain spaces. That was my recollection of seeing that game running on Series X in the performance mode on my 4K screen. Now, I take that same exact mode, I put it on the 1440p monitor, and instantly the textures look better, the colors look better. Well, I mean, the colors look better on the TV because it's, well, technically if it was 4K, it would look better on the OLED than it does on the monitor, but the colors look better. The character models look better. There's more detail. There's more, like, everything looks sharper, a lot more crisp. And I was like, yeah, this looks good. So right there, instantly, I'm looking at these, and it's the exact same game running on the exact same system on two different types of screen. One of them's 4K, the other one's 1440p. The resolution, so here's the thing, the resolution, if you're going like 4K is a lot of pixels. There's a lot of pixels, and it's at least 2 times greater than what 1440p is in terms of, like, you can fit, I think you can fit like what, 3 or 4 1080p's in there or something like that. Is like crazy. Whereas the from 1080p to 1440p is not that big of a jump. So I mean, if you're playing a 1080p image on a 1440p monitor, it still looks good. Like, it still looks good. It looks better than trying to play a 1440p game on a 4K screen. So, but we all know that games like, Final Fantasy 16, Jedi Survivor, any of these other games that have the 60 FPS mode, the ones that drop, they are dropping to sub 1080p. Now, if you're playing that on a 4K screen, most of the time you're not going to actually perceive that, just because of the fact that it's dynamic. It goes up and down. It never just drops and stays. It might drop for a minute or two when it gets like really hectic, but with Final Fantasy 16, when you're in battle, you will notice that it is 720p on your screen while you're playing that, and it's going to look bad. Now, that's why I recommend, if you're playing Final Fantasy 16 and you want the performance mode, set your PlayStation into 1080p mode and let it upscale your image, because then it looks consistent the whole way through. You're not going to notice those dips every time you get in and out of combat. Like, you're going to have a more consistent experience across the board. And I think that'll be better for you. And plus, depending on your TV, your upscaling will probably potentially look better. And that is like the only way I know how to combat these sub 1080p resolutions when it comes to Xbox Series X or PS5, is you're going to have to put it in 1080p mode and let your TV upscale it, because some of these TVs have a really good upscaler, and they're able to, like, when you get closer to the picture, like if you sit as far as I do, instead of it looking like all choppy or whatever, it looks like an oil painting. Like, it looks pretty cool. Like, you'll be able to be like, oh yeah, that looks pretty good. And then from farther back, it doesn't, it just, it just kind of helps with the image quality, the stability of the image quality, especially if your game has FSR. If your game is utilizing FSR, lock your PlayStation or your Xbox to 1080p. It'll get rid of all the fuzziness. It'll get rid of all of that nonsense that people are like, complaining about. It does. It immediately gets rid of that. Like, that FSR is such garbage. Especially if you're trying to utilize it on these consoles. PC is definitely better because you can choose the setting you want, but it seems like for most of these, they're either going for balanced or performance in those, and FSR and balanced and performance really doesn't look that great. Like, it really doesn't. It looks smudgy, it looks blurry, it's not that great. And being able to still buy and enjoy your games is what I would like for you more than anything on the planet. Because when I'm sitting here, guys, and trust me, this is hard for me, man. I read your comments, I see what you guys say, and I do, man. I take that stuff to heart sometimes, and I'm like, gosh, man, I'll recognize the name and I'll be like, dang, they've been a part of the community for a long time, and this is how they're talking about this game. And I'm just like, gosh, man, I don't understand it, but I do understand it. I am looking at this from the lens of a 1440p monitor when I'm doing my reviews, so I am not seeing it. And I do try sometimes to look at these games on the 4K, but I'm so happy with the way 1440p looks that I rarely ever go out of my way to unplug and plug in the other thing, just so everything's always set up on the monitor, because it's a consistent experience, man. I'm not telling you guys, I'm not trying to get you to hate your 4K TV. I'm just telling you that if you make the switch, if you make the switch and you get 1440p, you're gonna see a difference. You're gonna see, like, games that normally would look blurry or fuzzy or washed out, they're gonna look incredible on that monitor. They're gonna look incredible. You're gonna enjoy that. You're gonna be able to enjoy your visuals. You're gonna be able to have your cake and eat it too. But now I want to take a second and address this 30 frames per second thing, guys. Like, I want to. I feel like I feel like we need to address the 30 frames per second thing, because I mean, when you get a game like Gotham Knights or Starfield or some of these other games, Series S has been getting, a pretty good amount of games that are being locked at 30 frames per second. And the overall consensus is like, yeah, it's probably acceptable for Series S, but not on Series X and not on PS5. They should always ship with the 60 FPS mode. And I get that, man. Like, I'm right there with you, like, for the most part. But I'm not going to let something like 30 frames per second or sub 1080p ever hold me back from playing a game that I want to play again. Like, I won't. If the game is too blurry or too low resolution, I'll play it in quality mode at 30 frames per second, turn off the motion blur or whatever I got to do to be able to try to enjoy that experience the best I can. 30 frames per second, yes, that is a tough pill to try to swallow after all the 60 FPS games that we've gotten. I mean, for the most part on Xbox, I'd rather an unlocked frame rate up to 60 with my VRR support as opposed to having to have it capped at 30 frames per second. Now, I really do wish that Bethesda and would revisit, the whole 30 frames per second for Starfield. I wish there was something that they could do to get us a higher FPS on that game, but it's not a deal breaker for me. It's not a deal breaker for me because the visuals of the game, it's one of those games where I would probably rather have higher quality visuals to be able, especially for that game. For that game, with it being a space game and an exploration game and stuff like that, I would almost rather, because most of the time in that, like, you probably won't be in a whole lot of combat throughout that whole game. So I would much rather it be a better looking experience than it being, than it being like a super, like, high performance game. Like, I don't know. I'm still kind of on the fence about that. I'm seriously considering getting an AMD card so that I can really push it and see, just how far that game will go. Probably get that sometime next month, if possible. I don't know, man. I'm still trying to decide. I don't know. it's really hard, man. The FOMO kicks in pretty bad, and I'm starting to think like, oh yeah, I want to do this. And I mean, like, still my main target would be like 1440p. So I don't know. I don't know. But I want your guys' opinion in the comments section. Do you think that, well, hold on. Let me finish this off just real quick. Sorry about that. But I do want your guys' opinion in the comments section. But let me finish this off real quick. If we had like a normal TV thing, because back in the day we went from 480p, we went to 720p, then we went to 1080p. And that was pretty small. That was pretty small. Each one of those steps were actually fairly small. Like you could tell a little bit better every time you went up, but it was nothing compared to going from 1080p to 4K. Like, that is drastic. They completely skipped 1440p when they should have went with that. And so what happened with that is console developers and, like game developers were pretty much okay moving up these steps, going 480p, 720p, 1080p, whatever, it was a natural progression, and it was easier for them to cope with that going from one to another. And now, like, when you go from 1080p all the way to 4K, now they got to make 4K texture resolutions. They got to make 4K. Everything has to be higher and still be able to maintain that and get that playable on a console that, let's face it, man, if we were still rocking 1080p TVs, these consoles would literally be beasts. They would rarely ever, I mean, obviously they would still be, hitting that wall, like if they're going to 864p and stuff like that. I mean, like, we would still see some shaky stuff, but I think we would be a lot better off and a lot happier if we didn't jump so high. That step is drastic. And having a PC now and just being able to see everything, from Series S on a 1440p monitor to PS5 to even Nintendo Switch on the monitor actually looks pretty dang decent, and then going to a 4K, it is massive. And I want you guys to sit back and take a deep breath and be like, look, this is pretty massive. And to expect these consoles to hit that and hit that consistently, I kind of feel like it is a big ask. Like, I feel like it is a big ask. And I was over on Twitter, today giving the ponies a hard time, because them guys, man, it's like just accept it, man. Like, it's not necessarily Xbox and PlayStation's fault. It's more of the TV manufacturers, because we got sucked into 4K with all the buzzwords, just like we get sucked into the consoles with the buzzwords and the graphics cards with the buzzwords. It's all marketing, and it's all designed to make us buy and buy and buy and buy and consume. And that's what we do. But at the same time, we have to understand the limitations of the consoles that we have now, and be able to like, really, to really understand that. And like I was saying, like, when I'm playing these games, man, and I'm going through one of them, and I'm seeing the upgrades that we're getting and stuff like Forspoken and Jedi Survivor and all of these when I'm walking, because I love open world games, and that's like one of the things I look at. I like to explore those new worlds. I like to see the detail in the world itself. And when I'm looking at trees, or I'm looking at bushes, or I'm looking at vegetation, or I'm looking at the ground, the terrain, the density of the pixel that's in that. When you're trying to see that in a 720p image on a 4K screen, it just gets washed out. So it doesn't look any better than what you've already been playing. Like, it doesn't. Because that higher texture density and that the higher fidelity of the visuals make it look comparable, make 720p look comparable to something that with lower settings that you would be seeing like last generation that's 1440p on a 4K screen. Like, it looks comparable, but it doesn't look... But it can look a little bit blurrier. It can look like there's less density. Like, Forspoken is a good one. When I was playing that on my 4K screen, I was like, ooh boy. But then instantly when I put it on the monitor, much better. Much freaking better. Everything looks so much more consistent across the board. That's why I do these every once in a while. I'll make these 1440p videos just to kind of help you. Not because I have some axe to grind against 4K or anything, or PlayStation or Xbox. It's simply due to the fact that I think as a gamer, you would probably get a better bang for your buck, and you would be able to enjoy more of these games without having to feel like, man, 720p, I don't want to buy that. I know how you're feeling, man. Like I did that last generation after I started watching Digital Foundry. Every time a game would come out, if they said it wasn't 4K, I skipped it. And that was dumb, man. I skipped a lot of freaking games. So that's one of those things where like, I don't know. It is definitely a choice, but it is something that I do highly recommend that you look at and that you consider, especially if you want to continue to play these next gen games that might get even more cuts, man. It just depends. It just depends. Now I'm hoping that things turn around and they don't continue in the way they're going, because man, that's getting pretty depressing, you know, getting sub 1080p on a 4K TV, man. Like I know that a lot of people are going to be are going to really start considering going to PC when they could just buy a 1440p monitor and solve literally 90% of their problems. So I'm recommending that if you are considering going to PC because these consoles aren't giving you what you want, I recommend a 1440p monitor or even a 1080p monitor. You can still get HDR and you can still use your 120 FPS and your VRR and most of that, at least with Xbox. PS5, if you do get a monitor, you will need one that has HDMI 2.1 for your VRR to work. Like, keep that in mind. You will have to find one that will have that, and those are going to be a little more expensive, and they're probably all going to be 4K monitors. That's the consensus of what I've seen so far. So, all right, man, thanks for listening to my rant today. If you guys have any comments, hit me up in the comment section. I would really love to get your feedback on this, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you for watching.